Welcome to the Plot Point Podcast with Leslie Z.
And I'm Sarah D.
We serve distilled interviews with some of the world's leading authors in just 20 minutes because we know you are busy and we are too. After all, we have books to write, cocktails to shake, and fabulous places to visit.
Your stories are really epic. They're generational, they're deep, there's the prose. Was it that you started as a physician, then a professor, then a writer? Is that your path?
Yeah, I really had no ambitions to be a writer. I was and still am very, very content being a physician, which is sort of an advantage. I always feel, badly for some of my writer friends where everything depends on the next book.
Ooh.
And I've had the luxury of, having a job I love, so I didn't have to rush on the writing, and I could take my time and get it right. And when I advise people about writing, which is very rare, I always say, and I'm not being facetious, get a day job, because there's no pressure worse than having to feel like you have to be financially successful with the writing in order to make your living, which is very, very hard for people.
So what drove you? You've got this profession that's successful. Like, what is it about you that you had to go, okay, my off time, which is very little, that I'm going to write?
Yeah, I think it was the desire to tell one story. I was a infectious disease specialist in a very small town in Tennessee, population 50,000 in 1985. And by all predictions in that era, I should have seen one HIV patient every year or other year, because HIV was considered an urban phenomenon, instead of which in a very short time I'd accumulated 100 people with HIV infection. And I quickly realized it was actually a story of migration. It was a paradigm playing out in every small town, namely, young man grows up and leaves the town for the same reasons we all leave small towns: jobs, education, opportunity. But in their case, they were also leaving because they were gay and did not want to live that lifestyle, under the close scrutiny of their friends and relatives. And they made their way to the big cities, and decades later, the virus found them. And typically, once their partners had died and then they were ill, they were coming home. And I wrote a scientific paper which was, really widely cited because it pointed out this was happening in every small town. But even as I did, I just felt that the language of science inherently was incapable of capturing the tragic nature of this voyage and the sort of heartbreak of the families, my own heartbreak at taking care of young men my age, primarily at the time. And so really that was the moment that I became a writer. I think it helped that I was always a great reader. I had a great appreciation for literature, but I had to really think about how to tell the story. I thought I would do a novel. I thought it was going to be a novel. But, and in fact, one of my first things I published was a short story in the New Yorker, a very dark 8 story called Lilacs. And when the editors got wind of my background, practicing in Tennessee, foreign physician taking care of hometown boys, they invited me to submit a proposal for a non-fiction piece, maybe a 2-part piece on AIDS in the heartland. I was very excited because, the New Yorker pays $1 a word, and I thought 100,000 words would be just right for them.
At least.
Yeah, but to make a long story short, when I finished the proposal, the editor at the time passed on it. The editor who had asked for it had left, and Tina Brown came on board. And I wound up doing many other pieces for the New Yorker and Tina Brown, but she didn't want that particular thing. And my agent said, well, this is a book proposal. And I had to start from scratch to think about how to tell a non-fiction story. I was a bit reluctant because it was clear that I was going to be a character in the book, that I would have to be as revealing about my feelings and myself as I was going to delve into the emotions of the people I cared for. So it was a real learning experience. I had to read a lot of the masters of non-fiction, go back and read them. Things like George Orwell's Down and Out in London and Paris, and Kazan's A Walker in the City, and just all the classic ones like that. And so that's how I became a writer. I also decided to take time off from medicine for a year and maybe moonlight in emergency rooms and do this wholeheartedly. I also applied to the Iowa Writers Workshop on a lark, and the only criteria were 2 short stories, which I submitted, and they took me. So that's how I ended up there. Yeah.
Nice.
Which was great.
As a beginning author, that's just incredible. Has your way, your method, how you write changed from the beginning to now? And what is that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not even sure I have a method, really. I think to go to Iowa was very humbling. The Iowa workshop meets just once a week, and the rest of your time is just deliberately there for you to read and find your voice. And I think that I quickly realized the kind of sentences that don't work, and how I just sort of had a better appreciation for the craft in terms of modeling people who were doing it well. But I think with every project you're starting from scratch. You don't really have any sort of thing that you carry with you that you can use on the next thing. It's always, for me, a voyage of discovery. Lots of shitty first drafts, and then with any luck, at some point you arrive at a voice and something that you push forward. I've been also very lucky. I recognize that. I mean, there was no reason for me to be successful with my first book, or even in Iowa as a student to publish the New Yorker was unheard of. But
except your writing's extraordinary.
Well, but there were a lot of extraordinary writers there at the same time. I think there's an element of luck that you can't discount.
What has medicine taught you about writing, and what has writing taught you about medicine?
Yeah, I think people perhaps make too much about what a medicine brings to writing, in the sense that we don't ask the same question of, I don't know, school teachers or bus drivers or anyone else, But
your day job, as you said, influences how you see the world, how you see people, and that must impact how you craft characters, voice, story,
perhaps
background.
I think I'm present at moments of great human drama and emotion, at the end of life, or even at challenging medical situations that are not going to end the life. But I think the biggest advantage is, I think that being an internal medicine physician especially, I'm very attentive to details, to observation. And then the trick is to take all these disparate observations you've made and apply Occam's razor and try and make them into one cogent whole, to come to a diagnosis, if you will. And it was sort of ironic that both at Iowa and in medical school, I heard the same phrase, God is in the details, which is actually a misquote. The actual phrase is the devil is in the details, but the point that was made was, it's the fine details that make the thing come off the page. So to that degree, I think medicine helps. I clearly had topics that I could write about, but I don't think it's a given. I think there are far too many physicians who think that because they've been witnesses to human drama, they can just come and but it's still the writing has to work. I would never put MD on the name, on the cover of a book, because you're not going to be judged by your credentials. You're being judged by the words on the page.
Your story.
Conversely, I think that I'm much more conscious of the element of story in people's lives. Story is conflict, crisis, resolution, or as Hollywood says, it's drama equals desire plus danger. Most medical situations that might be routine for the physician are far from that from the patient, and we can easily get very, very, not blasé, but almost fail to recognize the emotions because they're so common. And I think that my teaching with students is to emphasize how this is, for this individual, this story is absolutely unique. If this was happening to you, you'd have a very different perspective.
And devastating and shocking.
Yeah,
and,
all those things, yeah.
You have this quote, the key to your happiness is to own your own mortality and in the process to become tender.
Where's that? I say and do a lot of things. I was just wondering if it was from one of the books I wrote.
In Cutting for Stone, yes.
Oh, okay. So it's from Cutting for Stone. Yeah, I think in that case, I can't take credit for it. That was the narrator coming up with something profound. But I do think that I think as a physician, especially someone who worked in the AIDS era, I'm much more conscious than most lay people, I suspect, about the fact that life is a terminal condition. And to quote John Irving's first line, I think, is in The World According to Garp. Maybe it's the last line. But
It's a good line.
what makes our life poignant is the fact that it ends. If a rose were to remain a pretty object all its existence, it would be a weed, it would be a nuisance, instead of which it blooms, it blossoms, it withers and dies, and that's what makes it so attractive. And I think life has that quality, and perhaps in my best moments, I'm more conscious of that. I'm like everybody else, I tend to sort of mostly put it aside. And that is what humans can do, is we are able to grasp the fact of our mortality and yet block it and go on. Whereas many animals, we're told, except for dolphins and perhaps another animal that I'm blanking on, because most animals, if they were aware they were going to die, they have a different. They don't seem to perceive their mortality quite the same way, which is why they can walk away from one of their cubs that's dying, or just abandon their mate who's been mortally wounded, because that's just not in their consciousness. But for us, it is.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you should quote John Irving, because Leslie interviewed him here on this very spot last year. But I want to go back to something you said, which was, I can't take credit for that. That was the narrator. But that narrator was created by you. So as a man of science, a man of medicine, as a medical doctor, you're obliquely referencing a divinity or another. Where do you think that creativity is coming from, if not from you?
Well, what I meant is, it came from me, but it doesn't represent, the truth of my day-to-day existence. There's something quite artificial about sitting down and trying to create a world where in a few pages the reader suspends their disbelief and enters this completely fictional world. And in that fictional world, the characters do strange things, the narrator proposes a certain view. It's not necessarily your view, but it's certainly coming from you. But I wouldn't say that it immediately means that that's what you believe or that's what you've said in life outside the book. So we construct voices and narrators, and they say things. I think the biggest measure, litmus test, is, does it ring true to the reader in that context? And if it does, and if it works, then that's what you're after.
Oh, I love that.
What are some of your, it doesn't sound like you've had very many publishing struggles, but maybe personal, like, this isn't working, and how you get past that.
Yeah, I think for me, writing has always felt like a struggle. John Irving is a good friend, and I just admire his discipline as a professional writer. He, day in and day out, he sits down and he goes at it, and I'm afraid I've never had that kind of discipline. And I think if my writing is in fits and starts, it's inevitably, the first few drafts are terrible, and I almost have to labor for months and months to arrive at something that might be the beginning of the book. And I think if you knew that ahead of time, that you'd spend 6 months or years and hundreds of pages only to realize that's not the book, it would be very off-putting. And so when that moment comes, it's hard not to get discouraged. And meanwhile, publishers, if you're lucky to have a publisher, are pushing you to deliver. So I've certainly had my struggles. I've had changing editors at different times, at most inopportune times. I've had, one book where I basically canceled the contract with the publisher because I could tell they really weren't paying attention to the book, and they were objecting to length and not really engaging with the content. And so I, at great peril, owing them a lot of money, I took my manuscript back. I owed them a lot of money. I had to find a new publisher, and now I was a tainted object. I was someone who had broken my contract. So again, the element of luck. I was very lucky to find, not one of the big 3 or 4 major publishers, but the 5th or 6th, and the only one that's privately held and has some sort of independence before the small presses within or the small presses within the big publishing houses used to have, and it's all disappeared with all the consolidation. So Grove Publishing has just to me been a godsend, because they were interested in my work. The editor was brilliant. They might not have been able to pay me what the others were willing to pay, but it was more than made up for in the attention I got, and ultimately, when the book did well, it all sort of evened out. So again, luck was involved, but certainly there's been a lot of discouragement.
Do you, I don't want to say worry, with people's attention spans, publishers, even John Irving talked about this, about the length of a novel. And I think your last one was 700 or something pages, which I think, a story like that needs. But does that worry you that you're going to be asked to cut that back into a confined story?
Well, I must say, I didn't intend for it to be that many pages necessarily. Starting out, it just felt like once I knew the whole story, that seemed to be how many pages at a minimum it would take to get there. And, so I think for most readers, the prospect of a big book is daunting. But the most satisfying comment you can get from a reader is, I stopped at this point to see how many pages I had left because I didn't want it to end.
Oh, that's the best.
So,
and you start
yeah.
rationing them. You're like, only 2 today because you want it to last. I do that.
Exactly. So I think that if you get past the barrier and the reader picks up the book, which you have no control over, and then if you've done a good job, it really doesn't matter. But it certainly is a discouraging thing for the publishers, for booksellers. It takes up more shelf space, more shipping costs. So I think if you can tell a story, more economically, why not? I personally like big books. I love the idea of entering a book and suspending the fictional dream is so compelling that I enter it, and then I'm living through several lifetimes and centuries, and then finally when I put the book down, I feel like I've traveled through this incredible journey, but it's only Tuesday, and I have another instrument that can suspend time the way a big novel especially can. And so I enjoy those kinds of novels, and maybe that's why my leaning is towards writing that kind of novel. I'm very impatient, unfairly I'm sure, with the sort of slice of life novels that are about things that as a reader I often find I'm not that interested in. Maybe the writer is.
It's like an appetizer, and I want
We
an
call 'em
entree.
Skittles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Skittles.
Yeah,
I don't
I
want.
mean-
I don't want an
want a
amuse bouche. I don't want an appetizer. I want a full meal. I want to really immerse myself in.
But it's very personal. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at the taste of readers and look at the bestseller list, it's leaning very much towards rom-com, romance, and to mystery writing, and more power to them. I am not objecting to that, but my own sort of taste is for big novels. Yeah.
Do your books start with an idea, with a character, with a subject matter?
But with each novel, I began with an outline of what I thought was going to happen, which is really great if it works out, but it's never worked out. I've always found myself having to abandon the outline, because at a certain point as you're writing, writing is absolutely mysterious. You wind up recognizing that this character won't do this. And where does that come from? I don't know. The muse, God, the right brain, who knows? And so I wish I could say I knew the whole story, but typically it begins with just a general idea of perhaps the geography, which is very important, and the era, which is also important. And you might, have a notion about one character. For example, for Cutting for Stone, all I knew was I wanted to set it in Ethiopia, because I was born there, and I like the idea of conveying a story set in a land that would be exotic to most readers, who tend to be Western readers. And I had a vision of this nun far away from home giving birth, the mystery of that. I didn't know who the father was or how that came about, but so that became the opening scene. And so it just sort of went from there.
With, as you said, only 2 novels, but an incredible level of success for both of those novels. What advice besides keep your day job would you offer to those of us who are either sitting at home dreaming of writing, who are writing and publishing or trying to publish somewhere on that journey, trying to get further?
Yeah, I think the goal should be to do a story, to tell a good story. A good story well told, that is my major goal. And so if you're chasing whatever is the taste du jour, or if you're chasing particular readerships or cultural phenomena, it doesn't always work. I mean, some writers are very good about picking up the zeitgeist of the times and running with it. But I think for mostly the challenge is to tell a good story. And if you do that, people always imagine, I get letters that suggest that there's this barrier between the writer and the publishing world, and editors and agents are like, obstacles to be overcome, needing an introduction. But the truth is actually quite the opposite. They are dying for a good story. They're fearful of passing on a story that might wind up being the next Grapes of Wrath. And so the challenge is not overcoming some mythical resistance. The challenge is delivering a story that they are interested in. So, I think there's too much of this notion of, if only I had an in.
Gotcha.
I don't think the in counts. The words on the page are what count.
Are you working on something now?
Yeah, I'm working on, I have loose ideas for another novel, but it'll take some time to come together.
How long does each one so far taken?
Yeah, sadly each book, I've written 4 books, 2 nonfiction and 2 fiction, and the first 2 took 4 years, 7 years. The third book took 9 years. This book took about 12 years. The last book, Covenant of Water. So the trend is not good. I need to speed up the process.
Leslie and I are we're long-term writers.
slow.
Mine took me
Yeah.
10 years working on it every single day. Leslie also
it's like
many
years.
Yeah.
I think everybody has their own way. So
Yeah.
it's very hard to sort of say there is a way.
Yeah,
You have to
no.
find your own method.
Well, this has been so wonderful, Abraham Verghese. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and
for
good luck to both of you in
speaking.
your
Thank you.
writing and your stories.
We'll get back in like 5 years and talk about your next one.
Wonderful.
Thank you to you, our listeners. We are
Leslie Z.
and Sarah D. And we will be back next time with another episode of the Plot Point Podcast, where we interview the best of the best. Until then, we have books to write, cocktails to shake, and fabulous places to be. And remember, writing is the best revenge.